Kalispera Yasas. Hey, good afternoon. What's up, guys? Today I'm going to the modern and ancient town of Akrotiri on the tail end of Thera Island, aka Santorini. Managed to get a free parking spot. I hadn't ridden an ATV here on the island in many years, and they've definitely stepped up their game. They're more expensive than they used to be. If you're curious, this was 45 euros per day in high season, but it's a 200cc bike as opposed to the old school 50cc ones that I'm used to. And the island is obviously crawling with them, as you can see. And now we're approaching the entrance to the ruins. Right when you enter the grounds, you might want to note a bust of the chief archaeologist from the excavations that began in 1967. His name was Spiridon Marinotos, and according to this, he died in 1976. But he is responsible for turning this into a great scientific and historic site that it is in the present. One thing that's really nice about this site, especially because the visiting hours are like in the middle of the day, is that you go from the absolute parched roads into this very cool ancient city. Cool in every possible use of that term. I mean, this site is gorgeous. Look, they've got a whole maquette. They have the whole ancient city in miniature. We'll call it Akrotiri. As I said, we don't know the name of it, but it had really modest beginnings as a minor Neolithic human settlement, and it grew into like a little bit of a city in the early Bronze Age, and really peaked in the Middle Bronze Age when it became a serious trading center for not just the Aegean, but it also became a hub that connected ancient Thera with the Eastern Mediterranean, most notably Cyprus, where they apparently traded copper. And they traded also marble and things with other islands here in the Cyclades. As you can see how deep they have bored into the depths of ancient Akrotiri, this site has layers upon layers, in every sense of the word, of physical and human history. And one thing that's interesting, this is called the Pompeii of the Aegean because it was an entire city that was buried in pumice and ash with the explosion of the volcano here on Thera, which is what created the caldera of modern day, what we know as Santorini and its archipelago. You know, what most notably caught the world's attention with ancient Pompeii in the south of Italy were the humans that were basically frozen in ash, parents protecting children and so forth, when the volcano rained down on the city. And what's kind of one of the mysteries of ancient Akrotiri is that I don't think any human remains have ever been found here. And that's what makes it really different than Pompeii. Now, one of the theories about why that is because there were a series of devastating earthquakes that hit this city in the Middle Bronze Age, and the city had to be rebuilt, and the city actually got the buildings got taller and taller because they had to sort of basically build atop the rubble. So the city was actually reconstructed and reborn several times due to insane seismic activity in this part of the Aegean. And so one of the ideas is that there may have been very few people actually here by the time the volcano erupted in the 17th century BC, because maybe a part of this urban center had been basically abandoned, or maybe people were living outside of it because they were tired of the roofs of houses collapsing on them during quakes and tremors and aftershocks and all that. So I think there's a lot about this site that isn't known, But as you can see, it's really, really freaking vast. I think of the many things that aren't known about the civilization that inhabited this area in the Middle Bronze Age. One of them is that, like, who exactly were these people? Were they, like, because it seems that they definitely traded with the Minoan civilization on Crete to the south, and the civilization known as Mycenae to the north. But it's also thought that they were neither of these peoples. And we don't actually know, even to this day, we don't know too much about the Minoans and too much about the Mycenaeans themselves. I mean, like, I was reading that, for example, we call the Minoans because of the god Minos, but we don't really know like what they call themselves. And also, this area behind me is known as Cenotaph Square, and this was like the sort of public space of ancient Akrotiri. And I just read something really interesting here that during some excavations over the decades, that some of the Cycladic idols, if any of you guys watched the Mystery at the Met Museum episode back in New York before I left for this trip, that Cycladic idols were actually discovered here, and those, if you watch that episode, are from the early Bronze Age, which like way predates this area in terms of how we interpret it in the Middle Bronze Age, which kind of lets you know like that this settlement went through many iterations over the centuries in the BC era. You can see here on this sign there is a Cycladic idol that was actually discovered here in this like foggy black and white photo. Just the mystery over those idols only deepens. Also, just a bit of a personal pro tip: I froze a huge water in my in the mini freezer of my accommodation last night ahead of time, and it is really hitting the spot here, because it's cool inside the city here, but just the trip here on the quad bike was draining. An interesting fact for the visitor too is that ancient Akrotiri is very much a working archaeological site. As you can see, I just noticed, if you can see the GoPro, all the footprints, I don't think any ancient Bronze Age people were wearing bands. A really notable thing about Akrotiri is that the city had plumbing and a centralized sewage system, and that is a wildly innovative thing for the Middle Bronze Age. And I think in history we wouldn't see that again until the peak of the ancient Roman period in the classical world. So the fact that that was happening in a prehistoric settlement like this, you realize how these people, they knew what they were doing. They definitely had something going on that was far ahead of their time, to say the least. And the way this site has been constructed for visitors to interact with it, it kind of makes you feel like you're floating above the city. It's a really great effect. Here we have what is known as the House of the Ladies, and its name comes from a wall painting that was in one of the rooms here of women that is in the museum of the prehistoric museum of ancient Thera in Thera town in central Santorini. Wow. So the painting was found in one of the rooms here. I'm not sure exactly which one. As you walk the periphery of ancient Akrotiri, here you come along its most exquisite ruin, which is known as the West House. And I think that's partly because it's called something obvious in English, because we don't know what these people called themselves or what they called their structures. But this was a 3-story home, and it was a grand total of 17 rooms. And one of the most notable things is in that corner on the top floor there there's like a cleavage between the rocks, and that was believed to have been an ancient toilet with a pipe that actually went down and connected to the Akrotiri sewage system. And throughout this house, they found in the early years of excavations, they found wall paintings that depicted like images of fanciful maritime life, like fishermen and boats, and supposedly you could, from this house back in the day, you could see all the way to Crete. There's a great vantage when you round the corner of the West House from here, and you can see it's a wild contrast because they've concreted the street there, maybe to stabilize the site, or they've excavated as much as they can, and you can see that they've put a bunch of stabilizing pieces here to kind of keep the walls from falling. But wow. This is just, you can really picture this place in the peak of the late Bronze Age. You can try and imagine what these seafaring peoples were up to, what their lives were like here. It's absolutely incredible. And this is what fascinates me, is this is so much older than classical ancient Greece. I mean, this is the prehistoric Aegean, and I don't know if we would even consider these people Greek in that sense, culturally or linguistically, or they were like maybe just call them the Cycladic peoples or something else. I don't know what their relation was to the Greek mainland, to where Attica is, or the Peloponnesia and so forth. One thing that I find kind of intrinsically exciting about ancient Akrotiri is just how vague everything is named, which kind of owes to like how little is known about it, even though it's been being excavated for well over 50 years. And so like this building I'm reading is simply called Building Gamma. It's almost like they're talking like from an American sense, like in military code or something, about the different points of the site. And one thing that's interesting about this is that apparently in this area a lot of stuff was actually blocked off, which means that what archaeologists believe is that after some of these absolutely devastating earthquakes, that large parts of Akrotiri were actually abandoned by the time the volcano exploded and covered the city in pumice. And it's thought that much of this area here was actually uninhabited by the time of the eruption. And so that in and of itself is really interesting. So it's almost like the world's oldest abandoned city or something. Like the West House, this building here, I don't know if it was a home or a commercial building, but this is known as Zeste 3, and I think it's the third of these. Zeste is a type of masonry. So again, like the structures here are just kind of given these like arbitrary names because so little about this site is actually really understood in terms of what daily life was like, or what language was spoken, or there were no written texts or anything. I don't know if they found any linear A, which is the script or alphabet used on by the Minoans on Crete. But here you can see actually, like if you look down here, it looks like not all of it's been excavated to like as deep as possible, but these are windows, and they've been reinforced in the modern period with concrete so that they don't collapse and just kind of keep the building's integrity. A visit here to Akrotiri wouldn't be complete without mentioning the myth of Atlantis. There are people who think that this city, once covered in ash and pumice, lost to history until it was discovered inadvertently in the 1800s, may have been the mythical lost city of Atlantis, as described in a couple of Plato's dialogues. Was Akrotiri Atlantis? Did Atlantis really exist? These are kind of like existential historical questions that kind of, where it's hard to discern where is the line between myth, legend, reality, geology, and all of these type of things. You know, could Akrotiri have been that? Perhaps. I mean, this is one of the theorized places where Atlantis may have resided, and I think there's sort of a fundamental there's a fundamental debate about whether Atlantis was simply a morality tale as told by Plato, or whether it was a physical place in human history and in the history of the earth. And, you know, no one really knows. Part of the myth of Atlantis is that the Atlanteans angered the gods, and the gods like rained hell upon them by basically disappearing their city and their civilization, which was like an advanced Bronze Age society, which is what Akrotiri was. So it's fanciful to think about these things. It's also kind of pointless because there's no way to know. And there are obviously competing theories about the legend of Atlantis, that it was in the Sahara Desert in Mauritania, that it was in, in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean. There are, theories that it was somewhere in the Black Sea. But I think out of any of those, I think Akrotiri and Santorini writ large would be the more likely place, and that this is at the heart of the ancient Greek world. And earlier, the ancient is simply the Aegean or Cycladic world. So, can we know whether Atlantis was real and whether this was Atlantis? The answer is a definitive no. Could this have been Atlantis? That's a definite maybe. As a bonus, there's some nice pups hanging out here. Hello. What a great place. And, I was here for a solid 2 hours, and I think that's totally fine. I mean, depending on how much you're interested in ancient civilizations, I'm very interested. I mean, I would have loved to have come with, someone who knows a bit more about the site, who can tell me more. And something I'm kind of curious about too is that it looks like it's set up. There's some infrastructure, like I noticed like the concreted streets by the West House, that maybe it's possible to actually tour the streets. I'm not sure, because there's some stuff, there's like ropes and things, and I'm like, like roped off areas down below in the, within the warrens of the city. And I'm like, well, that can't be for the archaeologists who are here. So I don't know exactly, but what an absolutely fantastic place. If you guys want to see more content like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.